We are live. Welcome to the EOS Podcast, my EOS friends. I am recently back from the San Francisco Hackathon, and it is picking up the pieces here at the EOS Podcast and getting back into the flow. We've got Alex from EOS Canada, and this is I'm really excited about this conversation. He's going to give us a lot of tech angles that you may not know. So Alex, welcome to the show, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me. Some people might know me. I'm from EOS Canada, CTO over there. We've been doing a lot of deep technical work, and maybe we're best known for writing EOS BIOS, which was, sort of a way to bootstrap the mainnet, right? We worked a lot to figure out, because when we came in, like 3-4 months before the launch, there was no way this network would launch. So we figured we're going to figure it out. We're going to write a software that everyone can run, and now it's still over there. It's still available. People can use EOS BIOS. We just released a new version actually to launch something that looks like a mainnet locally or launch other networks. But all the logic, the difficult things of the boot sequence is all in there. So we've been known for that, and we sort of huddled the community around such a way to boot in a network. So I think we've been known since the launch for that, for helping launch the mainnet. Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, that's where I knew you guys from. I remember there was a lot of I shouldn't call it drama, but around the mainnet launch, that was a really intense project. And it wasn't just, there was a lot of ideas on how to launch it and a lot of talk about, these attack vectors that people weren't taking into account.
And haven't seen much attack in the end, right?
And then it looked like, and then it looked like you guys, your team, EOS Canada, kind of came to save the day and righted the ship. And it was intense. They were launching the new internet all at once. Right. So that was like kind of an amazing time. So
I remember going to the hotel just near the office at 3 a.m. and then we would rotate just to see what China would have decided next day. Was a crazy time. Yeah, so it was fun to be there.
Yeah,
and to be part of it, right? And write pieces of software that people would use to actually understand. Because even though people went through the code to understand how we booted, just not the one software we wrote. And then anyway.
Yeah.
So out of that, we've continued writing tools. We wrote EOS C, which is a Kleos replacement that has a bunch of funky features, and that runs across platform. And then we also shipped EOS Q.app, which is a full-blown block explorer, and that I think today is the most precise, that has support for deferred transaction, whereas no other block explorer has. So we're pretty proud of that.
What would support for deferred transactions look like? I've used block explorers before, but not.
Yeah, so you have some operations that defer transaction for later. It's actually a core feature of EOS, a great feature, that you can have a contract emit a transaction to be executed later. So the refund, for example, when you undelegate some bandwidth, you'll have a refund 3 days after. That triggers, a deferred transaction that arrives 3 days later. But you don't see that anywhere. Whereas our Explorer, you can see that it created that deferred transaction. You click on that transaction, you can see it's been waiting, or it's executed, or it failed, because it can fail. And so it resurfaces all that information, and that's not available anywhere. So we've done some deep work for that.
Yeah, that's actually a really cool tool. That makes sense, because I have staked and then unstaked tokens, and there's that in between period where you're kind of in the dark, hoping that
you
click the buttons correctly. It's in it, and when it's your EOS, you want to sit there 3 days and wonder. That little.
And without such a tool, there's actually no way for you to know if the transaction has failed, or the reason for the failure. Mm-hmm. If you don't have such a system like we have, you can't know why it failed. But now you can track it, because we track the deferred and we link it back to the originating transaction. And then we also track when you cancel transaction that are deferred, because you can do that. And that's another crazy feature, right? That's what I like from EOS. With all this permission system, where you can have 2 persons sign for a transfer, but you can have another one that was there just to watch, and it would require, for example, a delay of 2 hours. He'd have the time to check and cancel the transaction mid-flight. That's with deferred transactions. But if you can't see them, you're not really secured or protected, right? So you need to have a way to see those things.
What would be that makes sense. It's almost like an arbiter in the middle, making sure that things are right. Is that what you're saying? And
exactly.
What was tell a story about how that
so look, you have an account that has a big stakes. So you set up the permission system so that you need to have a weight of 3, okay? For example, a threshold of 3. And each weight is contributed by either a private key or a time delay or another account signing. So you could decide you have only 2 keys there, and a time delay. The time delay can give +1 on the threshold, and the key is +1 too. So if you need 3, you can't just send a transaction with those 2 keys. You also are forced to add a time delay. So you set up your account this way because you want the guarantee that it's going to take minimum of X amount of time for the transaction to go through with your account. And if you're guaranteed that, then no hacker can try to exfiltrate funds from your account without setting that time delay. But if that time delay is there and you have the keys, you can invalidate that transaction. You can cancel it in flight. So it's not going to ever apply. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So you can design and craft like awesome systems that I think no other blockchains do today, if we can say EOS is a blockchain, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that's a really cool tool, and I'll start using that Block Explorer. What was it called again? It's called the EOS Q, right?
EOSQ.app, yeah.
EOSQ.app.
EOSQ.app.
And I'm sure people can find it on your website.
Yeah, yeah. And we have also a version on Kylin, and we can roll that out on other chains. Some people are interested in having that roll in. And that's all right now backed by where we're going now with EOS Canada. It's called diffuse.io, and that's a data access layer and an API that's more sophisticated than what we get with normal nodes, instrumented in with more guarantees. We can talk about that later.
Okay. Well, yeah. Let's talk about that later. Let's talk about the what you think generally the most exciting thing that's going on in EOS right now is, as far as just big picture. What's getting you most excited about the blockchain? If we can call it that.
I think we can. I think we've got some discussions with those folks, and I'm pretty confident we can tell. Exciting things. I'm excited to see the new apps coming out. So, of course, our focus right now is in having a streaming API with Diffuse, right? Streaming APIs that make user experiences great. What I'm excited to see is that I'm excited to see Block One's wallet come out also, and also the EOS Links wallet, because all these things together, we have an app on your phone that manages your keys, and that is just sort of a generic window on the web, and then web apps can, ask you to sign transactions, and you have those keys secured, right? It's like having a browser with those EOS keys in there, just like Scatter a little bit. And with sort of an API with Diffuse, we can see incredibly reactive and powerful apps where the user experience is great, is on par with what you'd expect to go on the web, right? We're close to that place where people will not distinguish they're using a blockchain. They'll see a thing that they need to sign a transaction, put their finger. They might feel secure about that, right? Because they're going to put a finger before doing some actions. And then for the phones that have like a finger touch ID thing.
Yep.
So I'm excited to see those apps come out. And we're seeing more and more. Like I've tried the EOS Links wallet that have integrated that, and you have like some apps. You go there, it's very fluid. You go there, it detects your account, poof. You're sort of logged into that web platform automatically just by saying, you can share my account name there. Mm-hmm. And then you don't need to log in. You can sign transactions that are authoritative. So yeah, I find that very exciting. The user experience, and because it underpins the go-to-market solution, right? It's a solution for EOS to become more broadly used because we're going to blur the lines.
Yeah, that's huge right now. To me, there's kind of these two missing factors. There's the UX, and like you were saying, if we make it so we don't notice the blockchain, people aren't going to use this technology because they won't use this technology because they love the tech. They're going to use it. It's got to be easier or as easy as what's out there now. And incentives.
With 0.5 second blocks and fast propagation like we have, and streaming APIs, which wasn't very useful before if we didn't have like fast blocks. People would just poll. But now you can have very efficient apps. Yeah, it's crazy. It's undistinguishable almost.
Yeah, and that EOS Links wallet is a beautiful thing. It starts to show you what's possible once this starts to flow nicely. I mean, if they had some sort of fiat on-ramp, that would be a game changer.
So that's the next thing, right? What excites me, it excites a lot of people, but it's the stablecoin thing. Since, I've been in the Bitcoin space for a few years. I started a Bitcoin business in 2013, ran a thing called Bit Credits. It was, to give each website its own credit, but it was all off chain. And then we have all the fiat on-ramp, and I became a payment processor literally, but at that time there was no market for that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, but why was I saying that?
We're talking about how the fiat on-ramp into the EOS Links
wallet. Right. So but the problem I was facing it everywhere. There is that people would say this is too volatile. We can't build anything like that. Like my father-in-law, he's in finance. He says, never, ever is it going to work if the thing is so volatile. People won't put their, their savings in there because it's too risky. And that's totally true, right? People don't do that. But if we do have, I imagine on a wallet where you have a little switch, and you have EOS, and then you can just, freeze it. And then it's exchanged into USDT, USDE, USDC, name it, right? Whatever stable coin or pools of stable coin you could do it in a wallet. Then it becomes very easy to freeze your thing and be shielded from volatility. And then if you want to go to a certain, I don't know, app that uses that or that coin, just a flip of a switch in a wallet, the user experience is going to be great. I don't think we need to have humongous fees. We could just transfer like a few bucks. And then you can start using that other thing without much volatility risks. That's going to be huge. And we're going to see new apps and people who, they understand USD. It's going to be fine, right? They understand some other currencies. So they won't fear that as much.
Yeah.
That excites me too.
Yeah. Taking that fear out of it and giving something people like a little bridge of something they're familiar with. And that's a perfect
example. Yeah.
You just flick it over and see it in USD. And all of a sudden you feel, confident. Okay, that feels good. And then when you want to get risky again, press the button and flick it back into.
And you know what? That's going to mimic more what happens in the real world because people have, for example, like $10 bill, USD money, right? And that's one representation of USD. But you also have USD you're holding in a bank. And that is not exactly, not in technical terms, the same USD because it's bound to different risks, right? And it's worth, okay, they're promising to give it back, but depending on where you store that USD, it's not exactly the same. In banks,
at like least, the long tail risk of having it in a bank.
Well, I've seen some. I remember reading the Ian Griggs' superb writings. I admire the guy, Ian Griggs. He was doing a block on things about governance, cryptography, and the Ricardian contract. He invented the Ricardian contract, right? And he was talking about smart contracts, or no, not smart contracts, contracts where you need to specify which type of USD you're talking about because they're not equal, right? If you're either in a trust here or they're in the bank there, they sort of bring a different risk to the contract you're signing. So that exists already. So if we have USDC, USDT, USDEG, USD, whatever they are, they're also just another representation of USD, and people are accustomed to that. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. And is there, just to be clear, the risks of the different risks that people don't look at is actually holding money in the bank and the possibility of, for some reason, not being able to get it out, or the time risk if there was a delay getting it out, or those types of.
Yes, a bunch of these things, which make it not the same ease of access, right? Yeah. Now, with the stable coins, the risk is obviously the third party there holding and the different dynamics for you to get your coins back at the times. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, well, how do you see it playing out that because I've thought about this as well with stable coins, but it seems like they share this long tail risk also of the stability of the US dollar. Like, yeah, it should be there, but what if the US dollar were to drastically lose value? Then what happens to stable coin? How's that affected?
It's going to be stable downwards, right?
Okay. All right.
Well, we're just seeing when we study those things that nothing is sure in life, right? Everything is free floating somehow, and it's pegged to something, and it's all in people's minds, right? It's a social construct. It's what people think. It can't be otherwise, right? There's nothing absolute about money. It's about human relationships. It's about exchange, which is a fundamental thing. That's why I'm so excited by blockchain, because it's touching such a fundamental aspect of human life. It's sharing, exchange, right, of things, of value.
Yeah, that's actually why I'm so interested in EOS as a social experiment, and the tech that's behind it is amazing. But just like the bigger picture argument of people saying that, you need to be code as law. And I'm always talking about there's this middle point where as humans, we're not completely garbage at governing ourselves. We know how. We've been doing it forever. There's just some kind of inherent flaws that maybe we haven't incentivized right. And EOS is tacking these different incentives on to what we're already good at. It's, it's interesting.
Exactly. I'm always puzzled when people try to fork out the human out of the blockchain, right? It's because some people see humans as so perverse that we need blockchain to save them. That's, in my opinion, very wrong, in the sense that in any case, it's humans that are going to, do those things. So we can't just fork the human out, and the blockchain is not going to make the human better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Humans are going to use the blockchain to become better and to do better things more easily. It's always about us. It's always about, we're the end and the purpose of these things.
Yeah, that's a great concept. It's kind of cool to think about the human as the, as the base layer, and then we're adding layers on top of it. We're not trying to add a new base layer,
But the person is the end always in everything we do. It's just implicit as how humans act, right? So blockchain is also a means to an end.
Yeah, well, and it's such exciting times we're living in with all the changes. I mean, and there's teams like EOS Canada are out there building all these little tweaks and tools that that's part of the reason I do the podcast. There's so much going on, and there's so many teams building stuff, and every little tool you build, like that block explorer, that seems small, but it makes the ecosystem more livable so that we can enjoy it and it can grow,
Yeah. So the block explorer story is not an end of itself. The goal there is to provide what underpins the explorer. The explorer is just a view of the blockchain, but what's underpinning is diffused. It's the API. And that API, we want it to be available to all dApp developers so that their application could be extremely reliable. They can select some guarantee level they want to, accept. And we provide that information, which doesn't exist right now.
Yeah. And for people listening who may not know what an API is, it's basically a plugin, like a developer tool. Can you give an example of maybe what one would be and how it would make a developer's life easier, a user's life easier?
Yeah. So there's right now 2-3 functions that are core to the Diffuse API. The API is a way for people that are developing dApps to access the blockchain data, right? That's what we're offering. And one of them is, for example, get transaction lifecycle. So the story goes like that. You have a guy who sends a transaction to a front node, and then it wants to get into a block, right? So that it's committed to the blockchain and there forever, and apply its modification of balance, right? Affecting a transfer from one person to the other. So they're sending the transaction through, and that's the nature of a blockchain. They don't know if it's going to get into a block, right? They don't really know. It might be refused from the get-go, then they know it's been refused. But if it's been accepted, it doesn't really mean that it's going to be inside a block. Could depend on network latency, could depend on the second node behind refusing it, but they don't see it. So it's very important to track the life cycle of a transaction. Now what people do is they send a transaction, and then they query the chain from time to time, come and see back and say, is it in? And then is it valid? Is it in a block? And then they'll need to poke later on, okay, has it passed a certain threshold of certainty? It's going to stick there forever, or it's going to be forked off, because that's the risk, right? You can have a transaction on a blockchain, if you have block reorgs in any blockchain, and before it reaches finality, and on EOS, that's irreversibility. This one is trailing from approximately 320 blocks in a normal network condition. So that's quite long. That's like 150 seconds. That's quite a hefty time. So, but in that meantime, you want to take some decisions, right? Where is that transaction at? Has it been made into a block or not? So by using the get transaction lifecycle, you can be informed. Push. We're going to send you a message when the transaction gets inserted into a block. If it's forked out, like it's not into the longest chain anymore. So you want to know that, because maybe you want to update your UI and say, well, I told you have 5 EOS, but no, you have only 3. That's the new reality until it confirms into irreversibility. So, dApps, depending on their nature, they will want to know that. Some people will not care, because the moment the transaction is in a block, it's a sufficient channel for them because they're sending messages, right? Or an email. And in that case, for them, it's okay, because the moment it's in the block, the other person can get it and have the certainty is legit. So they don't need that. But for a trader, he wants to know if the transaction is in to take the next trading decision. So it's very important. So that's one example of things we're doing.
Yeah, that's a good example. I mean, anytime that you're building a base layer tool that other developers can use, I mean, it's a second layer of tools. That's great. Is the EOS.io forum, is that kind of a side project, or is that one of your main projects? Does that sound interesting?
Right. That's very interesting. So we've been, since the launch, the question of referendum and changing the constitution and core changes like the Rex and things like that. It's been largely recognized that we would want to pull the token holders for that, right? Do a referendum, but we needed a solution, a technical solution, and so EOS Canada, a few other block producers also, and a few other volunteers joined in an effort to create such a thing. So the challenge is having something that is on-chain, so that it goes through the authorization of signatures of transactions, and that it would be, reflecting the stake that people have, because it's stake-weighted voting, and then for a way to, compute the results and then take action on the results, right? It seems simple. So we wrote the smart contract. We wrote some of the back-end tools to do the computation on the, the tally, what we call the tally, to allow anyone really to create referendums or voting system. It could be as simple as, where do we go for lunch, and you have your teammates vote, and then you disregard, the amount of staked weighted. You can do that. Or in the case of a global EOS referendum, we want to, handle all the proxy voting, handle the weighting, and do some snapshot from time to time to make sure that the vote is consistent, because people can unvote using that contract. So if they vote and it's consistently over 10%, 10% yes over no, then after a certain number of days, we will consider that as a yes. And then, so the block producers will take effect, right? Will apply the thing that is said in the referendum. Now, a big challenge is, how do you word those things, right? There's teams right now that are, how do you word it so that it's not confusing, so that token holders understand, and there's no two competing propositions. Like, we want to raise BPP at 15% and we want to shut it down at 0.001. You can't put that up and not have people very confused. So the writing of the ballot, I think it's called, that's ongoing right now, and the referendum contract and the systems to do the tally are in beta. So it's been rolling out, it's been tested. There's a few UIs, including EOSC, which is the command line tool there, allows you to vote, check the tallies and all that. So yeah, it's an exciting time. We're going to see the first time, I guess, a huge referendum like that worldwide.
Yeah, that referendum is going to be really cool to see it come out. Is there a group of block producers working on one referendum, or is there more than one referendum tool that's being built?
No, it's I haven't heard since a few months back. Any other referendum being worked on. It's the one. It's you can find the code at EOS and GitHub, EOS Canada /EOSIO.forum. And you have the source code there. It's released on the mainnet in the EOS Forum RCPP account. It was a release candidate, but it's being used for the beta. We'll see if we rename it or not, or if it sticks or whatever.
What's that starting to look like? You mentioned how it's worded is important, and what the question is important.
Yeah.
What's it starting to look like? How you're solving that problem as to how that's picked?
That's a good question. I would say it's more a question of governance, which is not as much my affair. We made the system so that it's reliable, and the smart contract on chain allows for different semantics for people to view votes, view proposition. Now, the work of wording the ballot is in some other people's hands. There's a working group for that. I don't have all the details. I hope I don't need to have all the details.
No, you don't. But, it's just, I was asking because I was talking to someone about it who kind of had an interesting explanation for me, which finally, because I've been asking this question for a long time and haven't got an answer that was like, oh, that makes sense. It sounds like, so if you guys were to build the base layer for the referendum contract, and then say there would be multiple UX interfaces over top of it. So depending on which UX interface you use, it's going to possibly, they're going to be in charge of how to present that information. So
right.
If you were so it's up to us as community members to choose a platform that we're really interested in, or that we trust. So if we trust,
right.
If EOS Canada makes a voting portal, and you guys and your team is wording the questions, well, I trust EOS Canada, and I, agree kind of with their philosophy.
Right, two things. So let me explain just quickly the sort of data model, maybe a little bit deep, but it's a very simple data model. When we submit a proposal, it's a blob of text in markdown format, and it's going to accept a yes and no answer. So that's the current proposal. We wanted to keep it very simple so that we could have yes/no questions. And the content of the markdown is just what you see on GitHub, README files, right? UIs can just pass that into a markdown renderer. That's what most of them will do. And there's no other fiddling with it. So most UIs will just display those proposals. There's a title, there's content, and there's a yes/no button.
Okay, so
that's the type of proposal.
So the question will be actually kind of created at that lower level. UI won't have control over the question.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the other thing is that the question, so UIs will allow you to filter by proposer.
Okay.
Right. So the example, I had a video on that on our YouTube channel explaining the fact that this system is not relying on spam. It's not risky for spam. Is that we most probably will see block producers put up proposals that they know they can enact, right? Because they have the authority there. They're able to, take the result and do something about it. Now, we might also see some other people that are influent put up proposal under their name and then start gathering steam around them, right? People will vote. But most UIs, I would assume, will start by filtering on EOS.io, just so that it's not, you're not going through a big load of, of propositions by people who are doing tests or voting for their lunch, where they go for lunch, because they can use it for that. So, there's sort of a vertical aspect. I was also giving the example is that, let's say you're Everpedia and you want to do a referendum for your community. They can do the tally how they want, but they'll probably put their proposals under their name so that people can filter Everpedia proposals. You're going to see, and Everpedia puts their reputation on the line where they put up proposals and have users direct their attention to it, right? It's scarce resource attention there. So I think the block producers will be very cautious at not putting out garbage proposals under their account. Doesn't mean that people cannot filter other proposals. And if other community members gather steam around their proposal, it could put pressure on the block producers to put out either the same proposal or simply honor it altogether, right? But there's a marketing effort. It's a global marketing effort to bring eyeballs to referendum. So there's a social challenge there that I think we need to focus, to send the smallest question, more clear question, and start by one, right? It's going to be...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that does start to make sense. I mean, that people, it's almost like a proxy. I mean, not a proxy, but there's this, people are going to have to build reputations for others to want to look at their proposals or take them seriously.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that sounds like a pretty resilient way to do it. I mean, so, yeah, I'm starting to get a clear picture on it. I like that. I can't wait. So it's in beta right now. When do you think the first referendum vote will actually go through or happen?
It's a good question. Right now, the code is ready, right? It's not a very complex contract, although we've fine-tuned a lot of the small details for being able to search and filter. But the votes are stored on chain, and people cannot, vote twice on the same proposal. You can't just take out the proposal and put back another one. It's pretty safe in that sense. And then we're waiting for the ballot question to come out, right? So the other teams, that might take more time than the technical things, right? Technicals, you can just run unit tests and you're done. But discussions, that can take longer. So I have no clue about when that's going to come out. Hopefully soon, before the end of the year. Right?
Yeah. Well, if it's that close, then it's the teams tend to move pretty quickly on the EOS.io blockchain. So that's a nice thing about what we're doing is we don't have to wait 6 months usually for something cool to happen. So you were talked about micro forks and hard forks on your YouTube channel as well. Can you tell people what the difference between those are and what a micro fork is?
So yeah, if you haven't seen the video, the micro forks we're seeing some small forks. Okay, let me talk about the recent. We're talking about like recent BP stuff here.
Okay.
So there's been a recent update to the target CPU time for a block. Okay, it's a value on the blockchain that we change. So that, let's say you have this amount of time for a block, right? It's 500 milliseconds. So I'm showing on my hand here, like 100%.
He's showing about 3 inches on his hand.
Right, exactly. And then you have like a half of an inch, which is reserved for the time you're going to fill up, you're going to consume transactions. So you're going to execute transaction until that target is reached. Let's say 20%. That's what it was before, 20%. And after that, you need to do all sorts of wrapping. You need to sign the block and propagate it to the network, right? Under 0.5 milliseconds. So all these milliseconds are very important. And it also means a certain number of transactions can get inside that time frame. If we raise that number, we can fit in more transactions inside that. Let's say we have a 30% target, okay, of 0.5 milliseconds. It means we can fit more transactions, but also it means that there's less time for block propagation. So we have been seeing. So we put it up to 30% because people wanted more CPU. It affects also the pricing of CPU. So the price of the CPU goes down when we do that, but it affects the network stability a little bit, right? So we want to have those blocks propagate from block producer to one another, but everyone has more transactions to process before they can produce a block on top, and it puts a little bit more strain on the network. So it's been tried at 30%, and we've been seeing a little bit more micro forks. That means some blocks have not arrived to the next producer in time. They haven't seen it. So they started producing on the previous block. So it means there's a one block here that was left dangling. It's just a stale block. And it can confuse people who are not tracking the transaction lifecycle properly, right? Who are just saying, okay, I've seen the transaction, it's in a block, the transaction is in a block, but it might be forked out. Mm-hmm. So these things put a little bit more, less reliability on the network. And so we don't want to see those microforks happening. And they're immediately resolved by the longest chain. The moment a producer just produces one block more than the previous forked block, the chain resolves, right? And most of the time, a transaction that was forked out is also going to be included in the longest chain. So for the most part, it's okay. But I've seen some transactions that expire before the longest chain comes and puts them in. So literally, the transaction was forked out. That's what happens. And then so that's micro forks. Yeah. Okay. It's about reliability of the network. It's non-threatening, except for consistency matters.
So is there any factor with block producers having good enough infrastructure to speed up the milliseconds, or is it more a question
network
of
topology
versus cost?
Yeah, it's a question of network topology, right? We need to have decentralized entities. Blocks need to relay from one another. There's a lot of work being done right now to optimize those handoffs because it's a very fast blockchain. This thing needs to be super efficient. There's few solutions in the work, optimization of node EOS so that block replication does it with less checks. Some other third-party relays that could circulate blocks faster, or there's a few other options there, like having the block producers be sorted in an order that makes them closer geographically, right? That's another option people have been working on or should see. Hopefully, I'd like to see that arrive soon. So that means like less handoffs. You don't need to go from Montreal to Beijing, right? And expect to come back at 0.5 milliseconds all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Well, it sounds, those things on the user end, people feel like the blockchain is really reliable already. So as those things clean up and it gets faster and cheaper, and CPU is less expensive. Those little tools all help.
Right. And that could bring us to side chains. I know you like to talk about sister chains and side chains, right? How do you distinguish that? Because that's another opportunity for scaling CPU and RAM and all these things, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what's your take on that?
Well, the sister chains, at first I looked at it like some sort of fork or some sort of competition for EOS in the beginning. I didn't have a clear understanding. And now I look at it as a kind of a resilient, like actual sibling to the chain. It's like this big family of chains, because once we have inter-blockchain communication, it gives us this opportunity for something like Warbly to try out some fintech, or something like Telos to try out different models that maybe even someday we could use on EOS. So I see like the sister chains as how they sound as part of the family that are kind of working towards the same goals, but are going to live different lives.
and what about how do you define side chains? And I'm trying to figure out the distinction there.
I use them almost interchangeably.
Okay.
Honestly.
Okay. So what I can see there's a difference is it reusing the mainnet token, right? Is it not? Or does it have its own token? Is it totally separate, but just reusing the same base technology, EOS, IO software?
Yeah.
Because, when we're talking about scaling EOS and the mainnet, I think where we're going with that is that we'll see some chains that are probably launched by the same block producers from mainnet, and they're going to be constructed in such ways that the flow of EOS from mainnet to those side chains, I would call them, maybe I'm not sure about the distinction there, but to those chains that are ran by the same block producers, that will scale for every token holders in mainnet, right? It's going to really give a big boost of CPU availability, RAM availability, because it's just another process with its own memory that can run and scale up. All these things are not without challenge right now, although, right? Because having cross-chain communication, I think, is going to be the next level of complexity, right? I think EOS solves a lot of issues with scalability for real-world dApps. Real-world dApps right now can run on EOS. Some of them, I've talked to a bunch of them, are really thinking, okay, if I really want to scale up, I'll probably need my own chain for all my users. They're seeing far in the future. But for that to really be useful, you need to have a peg between the mainnet and the other chain, because you want to have people go to that other chain, perhaps create an account, or will those accounts be synced with mainnet, right? Because if there's a different chain, there's a different account, we need mappings between this and that. That can be a little bit cumbersome. And I'm thinking also of wallets, right? I'm imagining a wallet that lists your EOS token. And the same way we were saying it just earlier about the USD, which is not the same USD, right? When you have a USDT or a $20 bill, or, you know, some USD in your bank account, it's not the same representation. It has different, you know, semantics somehow. Well, we'll see the same thing with EOS. If we have a main chain plus many other side chains, and then you have coins on all these things, they're not really the same, right? Because one is sort of locked in a chain. It might have some constraints on how well or easily or fast you can bring them back to mainnet to interact with another contract that lives on mainnet. So are we going to see like a wallet that sort of accumulates all the EOS on the different chains, and then you're sort of going to click and it's going to expand all the sub balances you have on the nets and accumulate them, and then you can, from a wick of a finger here, like transfer them from one chain to the other? It's going to be a challenge to have many networks.
Yeah, that seems like a huge challenge, and people talk about it a lot, and I even do. But I mean, what kind of timeline do you think is on something like that? That seems like it's something that could take a year or even.
Well, I think we can put out some prototypes that, you know, because EOS.io was designed with all the data structures to be able to put out proofs to you know, sister chains or side chains that are going to tell the sister chain that this happened on the other chain, right? A lot of the Merkle roots are there, and we can port with Dan's tree there. He has a special structure, so we can just pass one side of the tree and do some validation. So, but that's not without risk itself, right? We can put out some protocol, but if you have, as you might understand, or for the listeners here, when we have two chains communicating with one another, they both have a pair of smart contracts that allow them to recognize what happens on the other chain. It's two smart contracts working together to bridge one chain to the other. So you can imagine this is a smart contract. It can eventually contain bugs, right? And it's representing the whole other chain, right? It's recognizing or honoring everything that's happening on the other chain. All the tokens, might be millions of tokens that are waiting on the other chain to get approved from, I don't know, the sister chain to, you know, withdraw or release funds back on the mainnet. So you don't want that to ever go off of sync. So the protocols need to be very solid. The code needs to be very well tested. Even though we could ship a prototype, we'll need a little bit of time to sort any issues out, because it puts a whole network at risk, right? All the users on a network can be put at risk.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it adds a ton of attack vectors. I mean, if you want to add an entire chain. So would it be one protocol that's kind of interchangeable for every new sister or side chain, or would there need to be a specific protocol for every different chain that comes out?
I think we're going to see, do you hear me well there?
Yeah.
I think we're going to see many protocols. So there's an obvious protocol that's going to be native to EOS that brings those data structures that were designed from the ground up for IBC. So it's going to be easy, right? Because we're going to have like a very thin layer. We can reuse the C++ code even from Node EOS to port some of these, you know, features if we need to implement blockchain logic on the two sides. So probably native EOS to EOS is going to be easy, but we're seeing, as you've seen a Bancor X, they're porting things from one chain to the other. We're going to see some Oracle, some other protocols, Cosmos, and other Polkadot things that are going to eventually bridge multiple chains. We're using some mechanisms. So it's not going to be only one mechanism. So each of those mechanisms can put things a little bit at risk according to that's why if we could eventually have EOS back on Ethereum, because there's a bridge somewhere, sort of a wormhole, like someone said that, the guy from Rio. But that wormhole is not, you know, created equal for all the bridges. So that's going to be, and understanding all these bridges and having the UIs understand all these things could be really tricky. That's why I think the Diffuse API we're building is going to help alleviate that. We're going to bring you a data layer that, you know, abstracts you those things, so we can query multiple chains perhaps in a single command and get a developer-friendly view of what's going on underneath all that, you know, in the end, quite a complex system. It's quite complex. So we want to shield developers from having to understand those things, and they can select guarantee levels, and we're going to inform them that these are the risks if they're not using such an API, and that's fun.
Yeah, I mean that's an amazing project. That's one of those big picture EOS projects. It just seems like, I mean, it's so big it seems daunting to me. I'm not, because I'm
Right.
not a tech guy. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just yeah, that sounds amazing. So keep working hard. Thank you. Um, what other projects you guys up to at EOS Canada? It sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. Is there anything else?
Yeah, no, we're having a lot of fun. We have a great team. We've hired a few folks that are amazing. They do amazing work. They're sort of the top of the line devs. I'm really proud to have them on the team. And we've wrote. Oh, okay, you know what? One problem we're seeing on the blockchain is that some people want to query the state in a stable way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a problem we have with a fast blockchain is that if you have a transaction that transfers $5, right? You might want to know your balance after the transfer, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much do I have left? But maybe there's another transfer that changes that balance $5 and again less, right? So to have a clear view of how much I had when and where, it's not very easy in a fast-moving blockchain like that. It's also a risk on other blockchains, but you know the window you have to query the blockchain is different. Right now, if you want to query like 1,000 rows in a table on the blockchain, well, you'll query chunk by chunk, and you risk going on the boundary of another block, and then you're not sure of a consistent view. So we figured that out, and we also said to ourselves, like, people are going to want to query the blockchain state at any block. They want to know what was my balance at block 7 and 7 million. So we created a database that does just that, processes the data from the chain, and gives you an endpoint to query the full blockchain state of all the contracts table at any block. So that's part also of the Diffuse API. I'm really proud of that, and I think it's a solid engineering feat that we pulled out there, and so you can access, you can get an API kit to get that information today.
Cool. Well, if you are listening to this and you want an API kit, I'll put that in the show notes, so there'll be a link to that for people to find for you.
Dfuse.io, diffuse.io.
dfuse.io. You know, it's something interesting we came across, the hackathon was epic,
right?
And it was just, what a blast. But the DApp that won was actually one of our friends from Starfish in San Francisco. Congratulations to their team, and Starfish Mission. Shout out to Starfish Mission, which is we've got this killer workspace in San Francisco that they put together that's all crypto teams. It's all blockchain teams. So Lumios.io with Ali and a bunch of other blockchain groups are in there. They do, but anyway, that's kind of where that hack team came from.
Right.
But they did NuGet, and NuGet is a decentralized GitHub, which on the surface kind of sounds like something that's needed with the drama around GitHub being bought by Microsoft, I guess. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how feasible is that? Where are we at in actually developing something like a decentralized GitHub?
Right, that's cool. So you were in the San Francisco hackathon, right?
The San Francisco hackathon, yeah, it just ended, and it was like one of the longest in my recent history. That's why you can hear in my voice, for people who listen to this often, that I've got more of a blues singer's voice today than I generally do. I had a lot of fun this weekend.
I was at the London hackathon. It was a great fun also.
Yeah.
So yeah, Block One has been putting massive amounts there to create something crazy.
It was stunning, the amount of attention to detail and the amount of just the production value of one of these hackathons is like nothing you've ever seen I guess if you go to like CES or something, you're going to see tech giants spending money, but it's like a concert or something, or, it's just, there was down to details, like when you'd go up the stairs on the bottom rocker under like the steps, there was like logos, like, so it was all EOS and, and all matching, and it was beautiful. It was so fun.
Yeah. So the winner was NuGet, right? They want to do decentralized. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, there's a lot of projects, and at those hackathons, what I've seen at least is that the pitch is more important than the tech, because some of the tech that is touted in these hackathons is really, really challenging. Like, you can win a pitch because it's interesting and you answer the question, easily, but there are some really tough challenges in there. But I'm really excited to see that some people are taking on those challenges. I've worked with IPFS when we were doing the mainnet launch, and IPFS, a lot of people say, okay, it's a decentralized storage of the future and it's all good, but it's not yet a very reliable platform.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, yeah, I feel that some people think that because it's decentralized, it's necessarily better. But I'm always, concerned that the users, in the end, businesses will exist. Things will exist if users can use stuff and they're satisfied. We can't be subpar. I'm not saying it's not a good model there to have Git on IPFS, although I might say it a little bit. Maybe we need something more reliable for the experience for the user. Because if you have a developer that's trying to push and he's waiting for an IPNS update, he's not going to be happy. Like, he's going to be waiting and he's going to say, look, give me a Microsoft solution instead because it's going to work, right? It's always tricky to put also incentivization models into things, especially like a commit, because what's the value of a commit, right? It's subjective. People need to put their head into that and to judge and then to release some funds according to some, humanly acceptable, framework or agreement. And you've seen that on Steem. The Steem blockchain has a thing called utopian.io. That's very interesting. They've been using the Steem inflation to redistribute to people who are doing some PRs and doing some contributions, either in translations or in design or code. And they're using the Steem inflation for that, right? They're voting on those posts according to that community's guidelines. If you respect the guidelines, the community is going to agree to release a bit of funds for you. I think that's a great model. It can be replicated, and it didn't need to, to be hooked in at the Git level, right? At the lower technical level of a Git commit and have the distributed storage. It's just relying on things on GitHub, but it's still rewarding people for contributing to open source software. So I think we're going to see some sort of middle grounds, right? Well, people will realize that decentralization has costs, and we need to make sure users buy into that. There's a big challenge. There's sometimes a gap, and I'm sure we're going to figure out nice ways to attain better decentralization, but through meaningful means and more respectable of not respectable, but more in line with what people expect, right?
Yeah.
So that user growth can come.
Well, I mean, and you have a really valid base point there, is that people aren't going to use things just because they're decentralized. Even me, who is like a big proponent of the blockchain movement, basically, I still use Google for, Google Chrome and Google and Gmail and photos, and like I let it all tie together because it's so easy, and like I don't like it, but it's easy, and I'm not going to use something that doesn't work that good. Like that's how it is.
And decentralization has technical costs, latency, reliability costs that is not negligible. So when we want to do exchange of money, that's fine for a simple layer, but more complex apps, searching your email, like what Gmail does on a decentralized fashion, well, man, start right now because it's going to be hard, right? Yeah. You'll need to have powerful systems behind. It's not going to run on a smart contract, so you can have incentive models. So the layer there, we still need to figure out, like, where does it start? Where does it cut? What can we provide value with, but still have? That's why we believe that Diffuse, the thing we're building there, it's a data access API. Some people could say it's not decentralized, but all the data is cross-verifiable. But at the same time, people want that. They want the data. They can check it out after. They can check it out while, and we certainly will have big incentives to make the data absolutely correct. But it'll provide value because people will want that experience, and that's worthy of something.
And on this thought, it's kind of a good example of baby steps are the biggest steps. What's good about the decentralization that's trying to happen is that it's a one-way street. So as we decentralize these little tiny chunks along the way, it's not necessarily, there's not a lot of reason for it to go back the other way. So it's good to just slow down and just chunk away at it over years. And
I think these baby steps are going to build up into something incredible that we can't even think today, right? But there are small steps. Like just the way that Bitcoin introduced cryptocurrency and then Ethereum introduced the smart contract, but really the crowdsourcing of, fundraising, right? The core value prop of Ethereum is, not the core value prop, but the main use today is to issue a token and then raise capital around that, right? It's the biggest use. So Bitcoin and then Ethereum and then the dApps, the real use of dApps is another step, right? And it's going to be baby steps, but on which we can build an incredible foundation for future economies.
What do you think, like, big picture? Do you have any ideas of something unexpected that could come of blockchain that's like a bigger, let's say 10 years down the road? Do you have any big idea, thoughts, and Elon Musk ideas of what could happen here?
Yeah. Well, I'm excited I really love the Uber analogy, right? There's a company here in Montreal called EVA Co-op, and they're building something actually very important and interesting in the sense that it's Uber on the blockchain. But I think the core value prop, from what I perceive, from a person, let's imagine I wasn't interested in the blockchain, I'd be touched by that. The fact that, a corporation like Uber is now taking profits from Montreal Island and sucking them up and bringing them to whatever Uber is located, right? But it'd be very nice that the people in Montreal, they can use their cab and the money is redistributed inside, right? Small co-ops, that's what they're building, co-ops, so that you have drivers that come together, set their own rules with smart contracts that it can either template or configure, right? The whole system is built because there's some properly distributed incentive model. Maybe they can pay for the developers to build a platform. They can pay for sustained services because they want, high search throughput and geolocation things that you won't get on the blockchain. But then when drivers use that co-ops, pool of drivers, then the money goes to them and they can be rewarded a little bit, right? It's closer to the local economies. That's very interesting to me. They could have built a central Uber-like thing, right? Where they would sell the token and then they would have the profit, a single entity. But no, they created a co-op style thing. And I think that in the future is what we're going to see, right? We're going to see that local economies can flourish with the power of large corporations, with the efficiency of what we're seeing on Uber today, but locally. That's fascinating. And you can have people locally do the marketing for a co-op, be paid by the co-op's, incentive model there. And they don't need to, they'll be part of the economy. They'll be stakeholders of that co-op, and it's not going to be shipped out to a third-party corporation outside the world, outside the country, right?
Yeah, that is such a fascinating concept, because I always think back, I do these little mental exercises, and think back about 10,000 years ago, how humans interacted, or, even 20,000 years ago, how humans interacted. And it was this, as far as governance and how we made things happen. But we come from small groups and small bands of people. And that's like in our DNA, is to that,
right,
that community level of interaction we have a really good grasp on. Once we get past 30 or whatever the number is, it starts to change a lot. And so that's a great answer.
So the community-centered, close community-centered, but with the power of the giants. Mm-hmm. That's what I find amazing. Right?
You cut out there a little bit for me. With the power of the what? Of the blockchain?
The giants. The power of the giants. Like, let's say Uber is a giant, Lyft, whatever. Mm-hmm. But we can have that sort of, huge machinery and still have the local community benefit from the economy.
Mm-hmm. And the cool thing about that also is the anti-fragility of that, or the resilience of that, let's say maybe robustness, because if there's all these little micro communities, parts of them can fail and things cannot work. Right. But as those fail, it's not going to affect the whole. Whereas something like Uber, if something fails, like it fails across all, everything. So
I'm not scared about Uber failing, right? Someone's going to take the place. That model will still exist. I'm not scared that these companies, they have huge incentive, huge piles of money to do things. And they're going to be able to do it, right? I don't think that's an issue. The thing is that we'll want and we'll be happy to have a locally managed, a locally redistributed pool of money. Is going to be less fees, and drivers going to get more, and they'll want to use that. I think it's going to touch, the human sensitivity more, and we'll have still great experience, right? We need great experience.
Yeah, correct. And it doesn't matter if Uber fails, honestly, and they probably won't. But if you extrapolate that out to apps where it does matter, let's say like the banking industry is a perfect example, where you have a bunch of small micro economies all over the world, that it's far more resilient. If one fails, it doesn't have to drag everything down with it. That's where we start to. It's going to be. That's a huge idea that you mentioned there, for sure. I like it. What did you? Speaking of things like that, what is the fear of GitHub being centralized? Is that why from a developer standpoint, is there some sort of fear with Microsoft purchasing GitHub, and what is that?
So what's the the risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
On a GitHub, there's a lot of open source stuff. So the stuff is open source. I mean, it's free. It's public. You can take it and go with it. And Git assures you of cryptographic integrity of the content. So what's the risk? Is that Microsoft fiddles with files? Like they tweak files. They take your private repositories and then they give them to someone else, or they look into them, to extract your business IP. But they have contracts that binds them not to do so. And is that the risk we're seeing, that they're going to steal our intellectual property? And in any case, I think it's not obvious to have a reliable, decentralized system with privacy and built in. I mean, publishing and sharing information in an encrypted way that is secure, right? It's not an easy feat, because blockchains are good at public stuff, but the moment you want to share things and ensure they're private, you need to have a lot of gatekeeping, a lot of encryption, and encryption eventually can be brute forces and fail. GitHub has huge incentives not to be hacked. They have people monitoring that system. There's huge value in GitHub. The social aspect, the speed of it is crazy. The tooling they've built, it's an incredible feat, an incredible piece of software. I wouldn't try to decentralize GitHub per se with its UI. I can imagine GitHub plugging into some decentralized things or hooking in incentive models when it makes sense. But to rebuild GitHub from scratch just because it's decentralized, I mean, it's going to be hard. It's going to be very hard.
Yeah. Well, I've been on GitHub and I've like pretended to click around on there and know what I'm doing, but like I know very little about GitHub. All I know, so do you think that do you think that it's just kind of a little bit of this over wanting to decentralize everything, like and there's not a lot of is it not that big a deal that GitHub was bought by Microsoft? Did people overreact, you think? It was like philosophical.
Personally, I don't really care. I don't really care that they've been bought by Microsoft. Actually, they've been putting out a bunch of new features just recently that are great. Searching through issues.
It's getting better.
Maybe it was no. I don't think it's because of Microsoft. These guys were working on these things probably for months, right? It's just been released, and the acquisitions went in between. What's their strategy with that? I'm not exactly sure. I know Microsoft has been changed. I've always been a Microsoft hater. I've been an open source proponent since like a Linux advocate. I've used Linux since I was 10, right? Microsoft has changed a lot. I don't want to bash on them in any way. GitHub is great. They bought it. I don't know what's going to come out of it. I'm not concerned. They're not going to take out a repository. I'm pretty sure they don't have the time or the usefulness of going and peek in our repositories. And the guy going to gather some stats about general purpose. I'm not scared. Okay, good. Well, that gives me some perspective, and I think I trust your perspective. So I'll not worry about GitHub. Speaking of when you said when you were 10, I think when you were like 12, you built your first botnet. What was that for? Like, what were you doing? Well, when I was young, I had a small computer that was connected to the internet with a 1200 baud modem. Modem. Very slow. You could see the characters like scrolls. And we were doing some stupid script kiddies hacking sort of thing, and I wrote a program that was compatible with the egg drop bots. And the egg drop bots were the bot at that time, and it would connect with those bots and communicate, and then we would I had a bunch of friends that would run those bots. It was all written in MIRC. I was coding that in my math class, right, on some paper, and then transcribing at home at night. And they would connect, and then we could send a signal to the whole botnet connected together to, disconnect someone else to take over channel. Stupid things the kids do, right? Mm-hmm. But it was exciting because, we'd have control of someone, would give a command, we UDP flood someone, and then, that's cool. Yeah, I like those old, I like when the internet was new type of stories about people hacking or making fun tools. Like there's a lot, like I've talked to some people who like as kids would, they do something like hack into the local bank and mess with their computers. And then the view on at that point was like, oh, haha, that's so cute. They broke into like the White House. How funny, it's come a long way. So it's fun to hear stories about people, when it was more innocent, I think. So. Oh yeah, exactly. More innocent.
Yeah, that's cool. And you're also a classical pianist, I saw.
Yeah, I studied classical
playing?
piano.
Okay.
I never studied computer science. I think computer science moves so fast that if you don't learn by yourself, you're out of the game anyway. So I've been doing that since I was young, as I was interested, and I just learned it and played with fiddled with computers. So I learned it this way.
Okay.
Always been.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of questions about like CS degrees, how valuable they are versus boot camps, and how valuable they are versus just learning online.
My take on that, from my perspective, I think if you're an avid learner, you're interested and you're passionate. Well, I never had a CS degree. I never went through those things. I learned, compiler things and then the things people normally study when I needed to do so with high interest because I had a problem I needed to do. And, some text parsing, which is very academic, parsing, lexers and things like that when you build your own programming language. I ended up studying those things later on because I needed it. So I was very passionate at that time. Maybe I would not have been very passionate at the time of a CS degree because I was been interested into, learning Perl at that time. But So, and I've never been asked for a degree when I was doing an interview in my domain, right? So is it worth it, not worth it? I don't know. What I know is that with enthusiasm and passion in this space, you can go very far.
Yeah.
And you need it anyway, right? You're in CS, you need that passion because it's going to change. It's going to change all the time.
Yeah, it seems. It definitely has that feel of where just-in-time information is really good in programming, whereas just-in-case information could probably get kind of overwhelming because there's so much. Like, what are you just going to learn everything about computers?
Right.
So, well, that's good for anyone listening who's thinking about programming.
And also another thing is that courses now, or the university itself, is poised to change a lot, right? Because it's not true that we'll have hundreds of thousands of professors in all sorts of different cities that are just so professors. In an era where you can have the best professor, teach a class to 100,000 students. This is going to change a lot, right? And you'll be able to learn in a very different way in the future, I think. Blockchain based or not, some incentive models there, I don't know. But education is going to change a lot.
Yeah, from a student standpoint, if you can drive, half-hour park, walk into a giant building, listen to possibly just a professor, or you could sit at your house and listen to the best professor in the world. Those decisions start to kind of, over time, build up. More people are going to be choosing the easier one, So.
And then you can have properly adapted group time and individual time because it's been machine learning analyzed. That's the best way to keep you entertained and enthusiastic. And then you can hook, jump in your self-driving car that automatically pays the next guy on front because it sends a Bitcoin or an EOS transaction to say, I'm going to pass you by because you have programmable money. And then you can do that while you're driving. Yeah, future looks bright. It's going to be awesome. I don't know. Yeah. It needs to be adapted to human, though. It's serving the people and not the contrary. We're not getting rid of them because we're decentralizing the people, right? Everyone is centralized, right? Isn't that great? Are you centralized? You're so centralized.
I feel like I've got within this one spot. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is a good feeling. You actually, that's not a good sign if your body's decentralized. Something's gone terribly wrong.
Well, when someone says, "Oh, we should decentralize you," what does it mean, right? You clone me or just destroy me into pieces, right?
Yeah. I don't like the idea of that. I don't like where that conversation starts going. Well, as we kind of wind down here in the last 5 or 10 minutes or so, what did you have anything big that we may have kind of glossed over that's going on in the EOS community?
Good question. There was the block size. The reason why we moved that.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that. That's.
Did we cover that?
We talked
went
about
up to 30, and now we're reducing to 25 because it puts some strain on the networks. We want to reduce micro forks.
Yes,
so that's one thing BPs have been working on. Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Let me see if I have anything.
So I'm going to throw a last thing. It's a feature that we have on Diffuse that I think has been instrumental in certain dApps, working well, is that we're the only API that provides changes to the tables. I've been seeing some people inferring changes to the tables. And now I'm going to specify what it means by table. In the blockchain, you have tables with rows, and on those rows you have your balance, your name and your balance for a certain amount, right, for a certain coin. And then when you do a transfer, you actually change two rows, your row and the other person's row, and the balance changes a little bit here, removes the amount for you and adds it to the other person, right? So there's two rows involved. That's the state of the blockchain. Once the transaction has been applied, the transaction has succeeded, it has applied those modifications. So you can read two things. You can read the transaction itself as a receipt and say, this transaction was validated, so I can be sure that the transfer amount and the quantity has been transferred from one another. But really, what is the defining factor that you did do a transfer? It's the state, right? Because the next time you send a transaction, it's going to read that row with your balance. And it's going to say, do you have enough to send it out? So it's very important to know the state. And our API allows people to stream the state, changes to the state. So it's not just a transaction going through, but your balance going up and down according to those transactions. And we've seen some wonky contracts that even though you send a transfer, they don't change the balance accordingly, right? They don't respect the quantity field there. So there's some need to standardize a little bit, but some, diligent dApp developers will want to keep track of what are the actual changes to the state and maybe use that to reflect either their balance update. Means some apps will have your balance up there in the corner so that you can, if you spend things or you're in exchange or a decentralized exchange, it'll change your balance back and forth. So you can stream that out. And that's a very unique feature you have there. Plus the snapshots of the state back in time. I mean, we're really proud of that. That's really cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Actually, I was hearing someone complain about something where it sounds like along those lines, but basically it reflects like until you push the next transaction, it doesn't reflect the state of the last transaction. So if you had 3 transactions, you had $10 and you spent $1, it's still going to show $10 until you spend $1 again. And then it'll show $9, but then that next transaction is it's not reflecting the state. Is that what you're kind of?
So I'm not exactly sure what this case would be, but when you have a series of transactions, yeah, you will. Let's say you have 3 transactions inside one block, and first one is applied, and the next one is applied also. You'll have a state change in the first, so an update to the balance, a state change in the second one, and in the third too. So if you look at the block level, the state will have changed in a way that is the sum of all the transactions. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you want to make sure this is authentic or legit, you need to really recompute the side effects of all these 3 transfers to make sure they line up, right? Mm-hmm. But really, recomputing the side effects of the transaction means to execute the contract because the code determines the side effects, right? So it's a little tricky, but yeah, I'm not sure if that case what was the issue there. A difference we're seeing with Ethereum, that what I heard, because I'm not an Ethereum expert, I need to dig into that a little bit more, but Ethereum does not allow you to send a transaction before the previous one has passed. Okay. Right? So you send a transaction, and until that one is inside a block, you cannot even spend those coins before again. Whereas in EOS, you can just send 10,000 transactions if they fit into one block, and they're all applied in order, and you have enough money to spend all these, it'll just pass through. The end of the block will be the reflection of the last state. Right? So that's pretty cool. I've seen the Ethereum developers find that difference to be interesting, along with all the resource costs and all that. Are you seeing developers come over at all, or is it still? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. So starting to we've been talking with a bunch of teams that are coming from Ethereum and discovering, mind blown by a bunch of EOS features and the permissions, the costs, the storage layer, the storage semantics and pricing. Yeah, it seems like the team. How big is the Ethereum developer community compared to ballpark compared to? I think it's larger. I don't have the numbers. 250,000. I'm not sure, but I've seen a lot of people who have been designing things and thinking in terms of smart contract, but they know that they can't ship on Ethereum. Now they're turning to EOS because they see that now we have a platform that will be able to, to scale up, and our product we've been developing so diligently. Where are we going to ship it? And they're moving to EOS to actually ship it. But it changes some semantics, right? It's not exactly the same. The pricing model is different. So some things that were not possible are now possible. You need to revisit the design, sometimes from the ground up. So, but it's very interesting talking to people who are thinking about smart contracts anywhere, right? Because a bulk of it is the thing is going to run independently, and it can manage scarce resources, and that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it becomes a very practical decision at some point. If you were an Ethereum developer, you've been doing, developing an idea for, let's say, a year, and then you kind of are just waiting for some sort of solution, and
right.
you're going to start, okay, well, let's check out EOS. And then, wow, okay. That's
right. So I'm amazed by the speed of the development, right? And when we developed the EOS forum, the referendum contract, you can take a look in the code there. There's this test suite where we boot a chain with EOS BIOS, the thing we built, and then we do the test with EOS C, and all the thing runs in under 1 or 2 seconds, right? Because it's so fast. Normally, if you mine on Ethereum or other nodes, just the developer experience is slower. So I've seen a lot saying, whoa, man, this is so fast. I compile my thing, and it can be picking up change, shipping a brand new chain, and then running unit tests on it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. So to recap, we got Diffuse.io we talked about, the EOS.io platform, the EOS Q block explorer,
right.
The referendum beta. I mean, you guys are working on kind of an amazing amount of stuff.
Right. There's a lot of deep technical work. So what's shining out there through the Diffuse is like the point of the iceberg. Just there's a lot of deep machinery. We didn't want to just ship out a few APIs that we couldn't sustain the test of time, right? This thing is built to last for years. And we'll be able to give guarantees on that and provide solid infrastructure for anyone who wants good streaming, reliable, and very precise information about the blockchain. And we can put that on any chain also in the future.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like it'd be fair to say that you guys are a very deep-rooted tech team, and you guys are doing a lot for the ecosystem. I know that I talked to a ton of block producers, and I know that there's different levels that teams operate on, and you guys are on that real base level doing some of the really big picture tough problems.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, hope that continues to get noticed like it is. I'm sure it will. You guys are doing big things. Yeah. Where's the best place for people to find you?
So we have a channel on Telegram. Telegram was Dan Larimer's favorite chat program. That's why we're all there. The community's all there.
So awesome.
So we have an EOS Canada channel or a Diffuse.io channel. You can come and join us and check the website. You have the links over there. Yeah, okay. That's where we'll be the most responsive.
Okay, Telegram website, the Diffuse channel. All right, perfect. I'll share those links, my EOS friends, in the show notes. And
cool.
Yeah, and I don't really have any announcements. I've been announcing the hackathon and the scaling blockchain thing for so long that that's kind of my patter at this point. But that's not happening. So, welcome to the EOS podcast, and farewell. And thanks for listening, guys. And we'll come back soon. So, cheers. It was good to speak with you, Alex.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is, and your time is.